And then moving on to Chelsea, it's emerged in the last 24 hours that UEFA won't allow clubs to declare income from asset sales to sister companies. Obviously, Chelsea have done a few of those sales over the last year or so. Would that mean they're likely to struggle to comply with the rules?
Yeah, well, it's not a new rule. I mean, so yeah, I think the story really is just a confirmation that the Times has managed to get hold of out of somebody at UEFA. But the rule hasn't changed. I mean, they've never been able to use those sorts of sales without getting around some kind of loophole. But UEFA are usually very strong on this stuff in terms of rejecting the use of loopholes or for example, we when we talked previously about Manchester United's £40 million code allowance that the Premier League permitted, UEFA allowed zero of that. So UEFA are known for taking a harder line on some of these sorts of aspects. Likewise, they take a hard line on player swaps. So none of it's a surprise. And to be honest, I don't think Chelsea have ever thought that they would pass the various UEFA tests. I think they've always expected that they would be in breach of those rules and will pay whatever fines they need to pay as a cost of doing business. I don't think they'll be surprised. I don't think they'll be concerned about it. Going forward, clearly you don't want to fail on a repeated basis, and they do have some risk of that because the fines get bigger and bigger. So they won't want to do that. But I think it's unlikely that they'll be too concerned.
So you think that would be all it is, though, just a fine they'll probably receive if they are found to breach their rules?
Yeah. The way the UEFA rules work is they set out tariffs for failure. The more you fail, the bigger the fine. I think eventually they do have a wider range of rights around, potentially excluding from competition. But I don't think Chelsea are anywhere near that at this stage.
And then there's been obviously a lot of transfer stuff coming out about Chelsea again. It looks like Lukaku is set to join Napoli for a reasonable deal. How will Chelsea come out of that deal in the end after the signing for such a big fee?
Well, it's a complicated one, and there's lots of things that we don't know about it. But it appears that there was a very chunky impairment of his book value that happened in 21-22 because Chelsea announced a £70 million impairment line in their accounts, which we think was largely Lukaku, probably a bit of Kepa as well. But if you take off 40 million of his book value in 21-22, it means that if I had to guess, I would think that he was probably sold to Napoli or will be sold to Napoli at around about his book value. Now that it's been impaired, and therefore that will be neutral from a profit perspective. But clearly, the big upside that Chelsea have is they save his wages. And although it has been reported that he took a very sizable wage decrease when they renegotiated the contract last summer, I think it's still likely that he's on well over £200,000 a week, and therefore their saving on an annualised basis will be well over £10 million. So a deal for them very much worth doing, given that they have no use for the player. And I think even at 25, and even though they've lost, on a headline basis, a very sizable amount since they bought him only 3 years ago, I think. Somehow, even despite that, this actually looks like a decent deal for them, especially because there was very, very little bidding. I mean, he refused to consider Saudi Arabia, and it's looked like he was going to Napoli the entire summer. So where you have one bidder, it's obviously very difficult to get any competitive tension into the process, and therefore to get a decent price.
They haven't had much trouble selling some of the younger players. Maybe they're seen as better assets potentially, but the struggle to sell some of the unwanted older stars. What do you think the likely reasoning for that is? Maybe wages or fees they're demanding for them?
Well, I think if you were to analyse the market generally, and I did this about a week ago, just before the latest deals happened, but there's been a real skew this season, and there always is, but there's a particular skew this season towards younger players and players under 27. players over 20, there's been very few deals around over 20 million euros for players that are over 27 across the whole of Europe. And, I think people are more and more concerned about resale, and therefore you're going to see very limited action for players over 27. Now, Chelsea have got particular issues in respect of the players that they want to shift. They're not just the slightly older players, but their wages are undeniably enormous. And the reported amount of money that's due for the next 3 years, of the final 3 years of Raheem Sterling's contract, £70 million in total. And you have to remember, he's 30 years old. I think in October, before the end of the year anyway, he's 30. And they don't want him. So clearly they're not in a great negotiating position. He's owed an absolute fortune. And there are a very limited number of teams that can even afford, £300,000 plus a week. You're talking about a handful of teams in the Premier League. So Chelsea know that any deal that they do is going to have to be subsidised. Clearly, if they can get these players off to Saudi Arabia, that makes a big difference, as Manchester City saw with Cancelo. Sort of got them out of a similar sort of issue. A player, in his late 20s that they don't want, that's on a big salary, almost the only option if you want to get a fee for him is to go off to Saudi Arabia. So that's really the issue. I mean, I think it's obviously partly age, but it's mainly wages, really.